Besides foresight, poor eyesight, couldn't fist fight, had to overcompensate. Learn to be clairvoyant, see around corners, read signals and warnings, interpret omens, respond accordingly.
Broadcast from later, Valdes Simmons, Udit Vera, Robert Bolton is me, and Tamara Daniel, Innovation and Foresight Strategist with Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, is joining us today. Weak signals are stuff we notice in the world and suspect could mean significant change is underway for possible futures. On Broadcast from Later, we share and make sense of those weak signals. Udit, what's your weakest signal?
My weakest signal is very weak, and it's about a signal. It's a project called Insolventunclesam, and I found it because of my ongoing kind of interest in this intersection of finance, simulation, and art. And this is this person who is in this forum who dropped a link for a project that he's been working on all through the pandemic, which is he built a little digital electronic synthesizer to simulate the financial system through low voltages, and you can use it to produce music too, like a regular synthesizer. So this is the link that he dropped, and he has
raining currency.
It's raining currency, and he has all his plans, quite elaborate,
Cool.
and totally wacky. And the different components are he has these low frequency oscillators. Some of them are represent different financial entities. So there's one voltage line which represents the S&P 500. There's the Fed, which is represented by a different signal, and then there's helicopter money put into the stimulus checks essentially. And he sees how all these kind of signals interact live, and the output of that is just voltage out, which can be used to produce music too. I don't know what this means, but I just thought it was a really interesting project. And yeah, this guy, he talks about why he built this, which was, he said, I saw that during coronavirus, a lot changed in the world, and understanding the financial system is important. His understanding of the financial system to him seemed limited. So he started watching all these videos about heterodox economics and finance, trying to understand what was changing in the world in terms of capital and how capital was moving around. And so the way he used the tools that he had, which are electronics, to simulate the system.
Does it update in real time?
No, it's not connected to real S&P signals or anything like that. It's a pure simulation. So there's a knob for the S&P 500. There's a knob for helicopter money. There's a knob for the Fed. And you can just tune the knobs live and produce sound. But it's just a signal, right? You can, if you plug it into a speaker, it's sound. But otherwise, it's just a signal that you can visualize too. And that's what the project is.
Have you seen it in use?
I was trying to look for videos. I don't think he's put up any videos. He just put this on this forum today. So
cool.
He also has instructions for how to build it yourself too.
Cool. So I mean, I feel like there's a few ways to think about this signal. I mean, the one thing that you said that's interesting, because it's come up among us, is just that there's an intersection of finance simulation and art. I mean, even starting with finance simulation, what else I feel like that could include everything from tons of video games to projects like this to what economics projects and studies and things like that. What do you lump into that category?
One of the things that I've been seeing is people from the complex system space simulating the financial system, and in particular in the crypto space that's happening right now, where people are trying to simulate financial systems in different ways, literally simulating, but also there's this other new wave of simulation, which is almost real world simulation. So there's a type of project called a canary network, which is almost real. It's a crypto network, but it's not real. People can spend money on these networks and buy tokens and spend the tokens, and it's supposed to replicate real world dynamics, but they say that it's not real. So the token value is very volatile. An example of this is the Kusama network, which I think I've talked about before. That's a style of simulation that's happening right now.
Canary is an interesting choice too, metaphor for that too, because it is kind of I think of it as a sensor. You know what I mean? The canary as a sensor, which I guess is a simulation of a person in that case, like,
Yeah.
in the origin example, it's like a
Superworld's this website where you can buy and sell virtual real estate anywhere in the world, and it's on a decentralized AR platform, and they have like over 60 billion plots of like real world space, and every plot's the size of a baseball stadium, and it operates on the Ethereum blockchain, and every plot of land is represented by an NFT, and every plot is the exact same price, no matter where it is. I've been thinking about it, like, what's the point of this? But it's like a simulation that people play in, but I don't think it represents the real world, because like Valdis cannot buy the Eiffel Tower in the real world.
You can buy like a fake plot of land that represents it with a token.
Is it fake, or is it actually the persistent like AR layer on top of that space, at least for this platform or something?
It is a persistent AR layer.
Right. So you could put stuff in it.
Yeah, like you could like put a billboard there or something. And so like I can see how it could be used that way, like for advertising or even exploration, or you could design the space differently and people could go on trips, etc. So there's use in that.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see which of these persistent worlds persists, I guess, or how many. And like maybe many. You have whole worlds that are kind of have their own different like cultures or whatever. That would be totally different. Like this and Decentraland could all succeed, or maybe one will become like the.
But Decentraland, I don't think is trying to replicate the real world, right? It's not an AR layer. It's like just a whole different world.
Right. My point would work for VR worlds, yeah, or AR worlds, you know what I mean, or whatever, 3D worlds in general.
The Eiffel Tower thing is interesting. I mean, in all those examples were actually ones that are like considered like nationally significant, like the Golden Gate Bridge and the Great Wall of China and stuff like that. And I don't know if anyone saw that news. I know we're getting really off track with that news story of like the Afghan veterans who had left Pokemon gyms in Afghanistan after the troop withdrawal, and now like the gyms are like under attack or like being captured by people from Afghanistan who play Pokemon Go as well. And so like these veterans are like, oh, one day I'm going to go back and like recapture my gym. I don't actually know how Pokemon works, so I assume that they've like invested time into developing a gym. I don't actually know what a gym is. But these kinds of like bizarro like overlaps of like sovereignty, like the overlap of some kind of like military occupying power with like a global technology company like Niantic that owns Pokemon is like very strange.
Like geopolitics happening in the like AR layer that's created by like multinational gaming companies. Very funny scenario.
And like what's the implication when like the line between the two worlds get blurred, and who's the onus on when that happens?
It's weird to think about the control you might have over the AR layer of a specific location that you may have never visited, may have nothing to do with, and like whether you're interested or trying to create value for the people using that space in some way, like or create utility, whatever, for those people or not. Because those are the factors in some way that will, I think, determine the relevance of something like this. Like if nobody's if everyone's AR is turned off or whatever, and no one's interested in looking at it, then it's kind of irrelevant in that space. But if people are curious about it.
What happens if people are super curious about it and are invested in it, but the owner maybe isn't? And then like what happens to this virtual space when people are coming to it?
I think they would just have to start using a different platform or like a different, they would be, you could have as many, I assume you can have as many layers like this as you want, but you would just access them differently on the comments through a different platform or whatever.
But what if like the entire like audience is like people go where the content is, right? So like, are you going to get everyone to like transfer over to a new network just because like? No,
maybe not. But that's, it's not established yet which one is the right network. But you're right. It's like if some dominant company or something acquires this super world or whatever, and that just becomes what people are using because that's what's built into their phones or headsets.
And could you hold the owner of that space accountable to do something about it?
You know how suburbs often have like really strict regulations on like what you can put on your house and what you can leave in your yard and stuff like that? The digital version of that is going to be so funny because people are anything is trans-historical. It's that people are quite petty,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
invested in their own relative status and whatnot.
It'd be interesting for the sort of simulation as a service stuff too. If one is just such a good simulation and of a particular region, like there may be value in owning that. Like that's maybe something someone could do with it, right? Is try to like build so that the inner workings of it are as close as possible, just for the purpose of like introducing new things as tests, as kind of canaries.
Yeah, yeah. In terms of like the politics of ownership of like these tokenized representations of real world spaces, like the thing that comes to mind to me is like top level domains for like particular places, right? Like
That's the like
dot,
original, real estate.
like I think .to is like Tonga or something, but like all these like Toronto websites use it. I think it should be like a stricter like mechanism to like get like even acquire .to, which is now like obviously been eroded because of like the market, I guess, like just the fact that people can make money off of like selling it to like Toronto people. But there's like it's some interesting dynamics between among like it's digital, but it's a digital representation of a space, and who gets to kind of control that and make money off of it. And what do the people from that space actually have? How much of a voice do they have in protecting that? And should they, considering that new TLDs can be created?
I know, and in that case, it doesn't feel that important, right? Like in the top level domain, Chris has the this is free domain is this is fr.ee, which is Estonia's domain.
Is EE Estonia? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Back to Udit's like example, I feel like you probably need to get into the diagrams and stuff to understand the links he's making between like the different components, like so-called helicopter money and the S&P and the Fed and the links between them. But it makes me think of like criticisms of like that game Civilization like 20 something years ago, because it was like it would encode, or what it was able to do was just like encode like assumptions around how a system worked. And so it was like, I don't know what this guy's like position is on like finance and stuff like that, but he has like all these like the cost of the synthesizer itself is just like subject to inflation. So there's a kind of like worry around inflation, I guess, that seems to bucket this project. And I'm curious about like how he mapped the financial system out, just to get a sense of like, what are the links people are making and stuff like that.
Yeah, just like looking at all the knobs, I think they're like really interesting. Like I haven't tried to like understand the system, but there's some like really interesting entities in here, which I'm like, I wonder like how he's connected them back, right? Like, we talked about helicopter volume, we talked about household amount, but there's also gender. Like, what does gender mean here? There's influence. I don't know what influence means. There's millennial. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to learn more about this. The other thing that's interesting about this, just like as an exercise in transliteration, I guess, it reminds me of all these projects that are like interpreting the signals of plants into music or ambient music. And there's been several of those over the recent years.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to see if that's something that people are like trying to develop, this like ambient like sense or way of feeling something like the economy. There's like some kind of strange cybernetic translation thing happening here of like what new sense can you develop by feeling the economy in a new way.
Except those ones, most of them are like trying to connect to like using plants to the plants, right?
Yeah, which this one's not, I get.
This is like fully detached.
Yeah. But it's sort of, it's also like cool because this is something you could do so much more of, right? Like you could create some versions that are attached to specific markets or economies or the global economy, or you could try to simulate it in the same way where it's like insular from the actual economy, but with totally different kinds of factors involved.
If you could simulate or like have it attached to what was actually happening, it could, like the financial system to so many people seems so nebulous. And I imagine like this is just another way to demonstrate how when something changes, like the knockoff effects of that, and people who maybe, I guess it's just like another way of understanding something or explaining something to someone. And then I also think if you had different groups of people designing this, how those sounds would be different and what that could show us about the lens people take to the financial system and how that impacts the outputs of the financial system, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. It seems like someone has done this in a pretty elaborate way.
It's funny because like as soon as Rob, you were mentioning like that idea of like simulating like economies, I didn't make the link, but one of the most famous models in macroeconomics is this thing that Uda is showing right now, which is somebody actually built an analog computer using like fluid dynamics to represent the economy. And it was actually the guy who invented the term the Phillips curve, which is like a big thing in Keynesianism that tries to map like unemployment against, I think, inflation or something like that. And yeah, and he used like hydraulic system to represent it, which is like wild because it was so hard to wrap your head around it otherwise. Like,
which makes a lot of sense, right? Because we use all these metaphors from like fluidic logic anyway when we talk about the economy. We talk about liquidity, we talk about pools of capital, flows of money.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Fluid dynamics of the economy.
It also reminds me of like the Nala metas, like bath, like systems thinking and like
stocks and flows.
Yeah, like yes, like sources and sinks and right. Like the bathtub models that people use when they talk about systems.
And is there a like political bent or like rhetoric? Like, is there like a point that he's trying to persuade and whatever in this Insolventunclesam project?
I mean, in the title, you can tell what like his like
moral bankruptcy,
and in the cost of the synthesizer,
and the cost,
it's like inflated for every unit.
Because Monopoly is the other example of a simulation that has that sort of dynamic built into it.
Yeah, I didn't even notice this. This is wild. This pricing mechanism is like so interesting. He like increases the price by 2% every unit he sells.
Oh, that's kind of brilliant.
Yeah, it's like an interesting price discovery model, right? Like it'll like stop selling at some point when there's nobody else who wants to pay that amount. Until then, it'll keep rising.
Like a new form of planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
I didn't even see this. Interesting. I want to try to use this pricing model elsewhere, somewhere. It's quite interesting.
What would be the benefit of it?
I guess you get scarcity and like urgency of people to like the benefit to who, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's like you can cap how long you want to do the project in some way based on like, you know, or not cap it if there continues to be interest, the more expensive it becomes. But that's what's interesting about it to me is that like you kind of limit how many are then created. Seems like it promotes the potential for like resale though.
One thing this reminds you of is have you heard of this like concept of a bonding curve? It's like people have been talking about it right now as like a way to like incentivize like joining a new network. The way inflation works in a new system would be that you like increase the payout when you join the network early, and then over time you decrease like the returns or upside as you join later in the network. So for example, in like a concrete example where this could be used is like if you were building an alternative to Facebook, you could say if you join early, you know, everyone who joins early gets like $200 or something. And then over time, when like the number of people who join the network increase, the payout is inversely proportional to the number of people who join the network. So over time, the payout decreases to a point where it can even get into the negative, right? So you have to pay. In the beginning, you'll get a payout, and then over time, as more and more people join the network, you actually have to pay to join the network. And so like relating like the payout to the size of people in the network is a bonding curve. And you can create like these new kinds of incentives or disincentives to join networks.
Who's using it? Like, is there an example of someone who's used to this?
It's like common in people who are starting like companies, for example, and they're trying to like figure out incentive structures for the employees. So like when new employees come in, they get a higher payout. And as like more and more people come in, the amount of like ownership you get in terms of the payout starts plateauing as more people join the organization.
Like stock options and stuff, and the percent becoming less and less the more people join and things like that.
Yeah.
It makes sense with stock options, but I'm wondering about like customers, because so I see like if you end up creating something that's super popular, then like it's beyond the financial reasons that you would join. You'd be joining because the masses are there. But I don't know, like is an unintended consequence that people resent your product in some way, like especially if it flips to that other place where actually now you have to pay to join. Like I wonder if that creates some sort of divide or
yeah, a lot of people have talked about this as like a Ponzi scheme. You know, like the people who join early get a lot of money and then everybody else has to pay to join the network.
Like you better be offering something really sweet to get people to join that.
It's a Ponzi for good. That's what. It's a positive Ponzi. It's an inverse Ponzi.
Signal and noise. What do you think?
I think on its own, like noise, just because it's like another synthesizer experiment, yeah, fits into a longer history of like people trying to model systems. Yeah, I'm not sure if there's anything beyond. I mean, the fact that people are interested in macro finance, I think, is just like a giant trend, like or a defining element of our current political landscape in a way that it wasn't 5 years ago, or even
yeah. I mean, that's a defining trend of our current political landscape. Feels different than like a trend like, you know, plants or science or bacon. But that's
What do you mean?
Plants or science or bacon. I like that
Yeah.
list.
Just like, I mean, I feel like those the idea of the type of trends you could lump this in with, you know, like those just feel like trends that are more about people like wanting to attach them to their identity at a given time because it's trendy, as opposed to something like this where it's like maybe it's like science. I don't know, in that way, where I feel like there was kind of like a wave of like science becoming cool that was just part of, I don't know, the internet like taking its turn with like nerdiness about everything. But
we should be talking like macro influencers, by which I mean like literally like macroeconomic influencers, stuff like that. Anyway, noise.
Macro. Okay.
Name one? Satoshi Nakamoto. That's like the biggest.
The most macro.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Tamara, signal and noise.
I would say noise, but since it was created today, like I'm not, or you found it today, I'm not 100% sure. I think it could be a signal if it starts to bring in other besides just financial. Like if it, I don't think we've mastered at all. I don't even think we're close to like incorporating different forms of capital into one system. And so I think if this could figure that out in some interesting way, and it would obviously be subjective connection, could be a signal of something.
Yeah, I think it's a signal. And I mean, it's part of the lineage of what it was calling like finance simulation like art, which there's a pretty long history of it, but pretty obscure, I think, for the most part. And I think that's something we'll see more of, like things that blur the line between finance and simulation, which is maybe finance is already simulation, and then sort of layers of abstraction in that, and like when does it become art and when it isn't. There's a lot of that happening now, and it feels like there's something happening. So I think there's a signal there becoming a wave. I don't know. I'm trying to think of the right fluid dynamics metaphor now.
You saying that like brings me to this, like, I don't know if it's like a philosophical feeling or thought or question, but like,
Tamara, what's your weakest signal?
Okay, I don't think it's as weak. It's about phosphorus. So phosphorus, essential to growing crops. It's essential to cell development in plants. So we use it in farming as a fertilizer and to increase crop yields. Humans also need it. We need like a little less than 1,000 milligrams a day, like 700, 800. And phosphorus is currently, historically, always locked in sediments and rocks. And then we have all these processes to extract it and create superphosphate. But the global reserves of phosphorus are shrinking because of water pollution and because of the fact that we are using it in farming so much. And at current consumption levels, we'll run out of it in about 80 years. So in response to this, these Swiss researchers created this thing called the Urine Express, where they're looking for ways to recycle human phosphorus in humans that they consume through food, through their urine. So it's essentially this like mobile treatment plant where someone pees into this like RV style sort of thing, like I'm assuming in a urinal. And then through a process that takes about 2 to 3 days, they're able to collect urine and other valuable materials. And they get about 70 liters of fertilizer and 930 liters of water from 1,000 liters of urine in 2 to 3 days. So that's like enough to irrigate about 2,000 square meters of soil. They say they could also maybe further purify it to drinking water. So that's my signal, this Urine Express. And it totally makes me think about humans as farms, but it really starts to make me think about who's getting into farming right now and how they will use it. So we know like a lot of these big corporations are entering into the agriculture business, and a lot of these big, less than ethical corporations are entering into the agriculture business. And so I think about like how people might voluntarily or be forced to be part of like this closed loop system as a human. Like, you know, Amazon's getting into farming. Like, could they force their employees to pee in this Urine Express?
Instead of
like,
not
why?
letting them.
Yeah, instead of not letting them pee, they found a way. So I think with that, like on top, I wonder what the ethics of it. Like, I think on an infrastructure level, like I think I read that Berlin is trying to do this there, or Germany's trying to do this within their sewage system. But like, what does it mean to have your resources harnessed? And like, do you have any permission with that? And like, where do you draw the line with waste? So like when I put my waste outside my house, it's no longer mine legally. So that's all the directions my mind is going with this.
How much value phosphorus one person can produce in a week? That's the number I want to know. Is it like $1? Is it like 5 cents? Is it like who knows? I'm so curious.
I guess it depends on how badly we need the phosphorus. Like the cost of that amount would go up exponentially as the amount of phosphorus, naturally occurring phosphorus, decreases, right? It becomes more valuable.
And I wonder how like what you consume impacts this. This would be the funny, dangerous like incentive to like drink, I don't know, something other than water, for example.
Gatorade.
But it would be priced
extra electrolytes.
Right. Gatorade plants.
I'm just like wondering, I'm assuming this technology is like used in space missions all the time, right? Like recycling water. Do you know anything about where the technology is coming from? I'm just curious.
They use like bacteria and algae. I'll re-pull up the piece that I was looking at.
The other thing it reminded me of is this person who like donated their cells to a lab. They had some like scientific utility in like replicating those cells and culturing them and like keeping them on hand for experimentation. And now this particular person's cells are the largest amount of cells for a single human in any lab, because they have so many versions of these cells. It's just been replicated and cultured in all these different institutional settings. And the family of this person has been fighting this legal battle to like get a certain kind of like acknowledgement and credit for the like scientific contributions this person's genetics have made to humanity. I don't know. I think it's like an interesting like way to think about like as a human what you can contribute through like just your body to, which might be something that you are completely unaware of over your life.
Does it matter if you're aware or not?
Like the example you gave about the sewage is that you don't actually, there's like an asymmetry of information in like the value that you think your waste or your body has, right? Where you don't know, but you know, the city knows, or the people who are kind of like harvesting the phosphorus from your waste know. In the same way, I think there's an asymmetry of information between like this institution and this person, in which while this person was living, they didn't know their body had a certain kind of value. But after they died, their body did have a certain value, and like a very immense amount of value for the scientific establishment, which they never lived to see.
I think to me, it depends on who's extracting the value. Like, again, if Amazon was getting my pee, I'd want some compensation for it. But if it was like this, like state sanctioned agriculture, I don't even know. Yeah, I guess it depends. Or maybe I want control over who gets my urine.
For some reason, I worry more about it being like the privacy side of this, which maybe there is none to this example, but in thinking about this topic, I'm like more concerned about the idea of like your employer like having a sensor or something like that to like know about your health or something, like, you know, than the aggregate like resourcing of people's urine or whatever.
To me, like it's almost like whose phosphorus is it? Like seems like irrelevant in some ways. Like it's like it's like your body is just part of this one giant like mass of human flesh that is like uprooting phosphorus from soil and moving it into oceans, right? And you're just part of that continuous stream of things, like that continuous like metabolism of like the earth, like moving minerals around its surface, and going through you as an intermediary. And like, yeah,
just because it's gone through you doesn't mean that it's yours to begin with.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if this is something that becomes widely accepted, like what the implications of that are. Like, this isn't what I necessarily would have thought would have led to us feeling more interconnected and responsible to one another and the earth, et cetera. But like something like this could be the intermediary to that. And then there could be other implications where we like are more in service to one another and the environment than ourselves, when we see ourselves as like parts of ourselves as being beyond like a valuable resource, because I feel like the word resource takes away from that essence, but like a valuable part of the ecosystem that like keeps us everything sort of moving.
Yeah, interesting.
A phosphorus commons.
There's something interesting too, and just have a good look at like existing systems. Like I'm a big fan of modern plumbing. I love my running water, and also the like magic of like your waste just being like flushed away, is it's a really convenient luxury. But as great as that is, of the experience of it is, like I don't trust anything where you're just like you have waste and it's just away. Like the same as people throwing garbage down a chute or whatever, or like we've talked about recycling being not what it purports to be. As soon as you have this like idea of like it's away, it's thrown out, it's like that doesn't really exist. But is there in this case some sort of new system that we can start thinking about and like what that entails? And when you start thinking about that, like can you look at like what are the other parts of this? And it seems like there's only been really sort of like iterative environmental changes to toilets and things and how much water is being used and things like that. Can you change the system to really become smarter and more resourceful about some of those outputs? And like,
well, firstly, thank you for reminding me of the magic of modern plumbing, because I don't often think about it.
So I think about it every shower.
But that makes me wonder, like, if phosphorus sort of becomes this gold, are countries that have less modern plumbing at an advantage here?
Yeah, it's a leapfrog, sure. Potentially.
Is that the case? So like I imagine like the site of like extraction would be like the sewage filtration centers, whatever they call it, right? And like the ones that
goes on already.
Yeah, probably. Like I wonder if like the ones that have the most modern public plumbing are the ones that have the least amount of like kind of like leakage between homes to the filtration centers, so they can maximize the amount of filtration that happen and like resource extraction that can happen at the filtration centers.
Well, if they can do this in a little mini RV trailer-y thing, then I wonder if it can be something that could, like, if you could prototype it down to something that any individual household could have, and then they could use it for their own farming.
I see.
So I think it could happen at both scales, right? Like if Germany's going to mandate that municipalities do this, it obviously can happen at a larger scale, but I think it's like the portableness of it.
If that's the case, why do you even have to like extract the phosphorus? Why do you have to refine the urine? Why not just urinate on your plants? Like, don't plants also need ammonia? Isn't that like they need all of those things? And so you're just trying to like rebalance. Like, why do you need to extract the phosphorus in that case?
This is gross. It's no, like
it's not about you moralizing. This topic doesn't need to be moralized.
Well, no, because your pee is all the stuff that your body doesn't want. It's waste, and then there is phosphorus in it.
But your pee has materials that plants want, no? Just as your poop is material that plants want.
Yeah, people used to compete over it. Like people used to steal. What was it called? Like night, because people like go to the bathroom in the evenings and stuff like that. And people would like steal those buckets to put on
the chamber pots,
stuff like that. Yeah.
Or something.
Well, fertilizing. Yeah. Like before we had fertilizers, that was like the only way you could get an advantage. Both nitrogen and phosphorus that are in like human waste products. And I think it's still done in certain places. Does anyone talk about it in permaculture? I have no idea.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, I spoke with Louisa, who was at permaculture camp recently, and she was great. I don't know, about building a compost that was actually going to be used to heat their water. It's pretty interesting to the modern plumbing conversation. She'd been shoveling shit for a few days in order.
Like human shit?
I don't, maybe partly. I mean, I don't know entirely. Actually,
Right.
she didn't say. I didn't ask. But for the purposes of composting. But the purpose of this compost, in part, was to run tubing through it, which would be the shower water. And the compost gets so hot, apparently, when it's doing its composting, that becomes the fresh water that's running through there. Becomes a hot shower that she gets to take after shoveling shit for days. So she's like, this is going to be the best shower of my life.
Hot shower.
Signal or noise? Fathers?
I think there's like a lot to say, and yeah, I think it's a signal. I think the way of framing it as like a potential like fight over like resources is like interesting because there is no technological fix for phosphorus in the way that there was for nitrogen. And I don't think there's any on the horizon as far as I understand. So the idea of like monetizing waste streams is like pretty interesting, and the Amazon example definitely had me thinking in a way that I wouldn't have like framed this. So yeah, I think like in that regard, a signal.
Cool. Would it?
Yeah, I think it's a signal for the same reasons. But it is also reminding me of like just like other ways people have tried to like extract resources from human waste. And there's like a huge, like India has a lot of this actually, which is interesting. There's like biogas, which is also like extracting fuel and fertilizer from like human waste. They have these like biogas plants, which is like is actually like a fairly clean fuel also. And I wonder if like these techniques, which have been tried in the global south, will intersect with some of the ways that people think about it in the global north now. Interesting. I don't know. I'd say it's signal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't really call if I think it's a signal in noise just based on what I know, which is very little. But the conversation I think should be happening more probably, and at least in my world. I'm kind of curious about these things, and it's like as much as I can enjoy modern plumbing, I'm curious. Like, yeah, can we improve how these systems work? And Aldous, what's your weakest signal?
Okay, well, it's like a very liquid hydraulic fluid day, so somehow everyone's signals are like streams of something, and mine is like literally like financial streams, and like probably some. I mean, Uda, I feel like I'm curious if you already know about this kind of stuff. There's like a company, Superfluid, that does all this stuff with Ethereum around turning financial processes into streams instead of like batch processing. And so, as far as I understand, at least on Twitter, this is what people were saying. One of the first like employees now is going to be paid by a stream instead of a biweekly batch, so that every second he's getting paid, like, and you can watch it in real time, adding into his like account as he goes along. And so he's no longer going to get like whatever amount of money every 2 weeks. It's just like a constant process. And I didn't really look into it any more than that. Like people on the thread were talking about how this is like potentially some kind of a solution for problems around payday loans and things like that. I was like very skeptical of that idea, but I'm like curious. I don't really know like if what this is like supposed to be used for.
Crypto payroll tool, right? That's my understanding. That's when I first read about it as a crypto payroll tool.
So like, but why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's composable. So like you can set up like different, if you want to like automate how like money is being paid out to different people based on like how much money is coming into an account, this is how you would do it. It's like, it's just the automation for between like revenues and payroll. So you can like plug in your revenues and like calculate like certain kind of splits and then make sure that it gets paid out to different people or different accounts. And they could be people or they could be businesses or whatever. So it's a tool to do that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
the streams concept is actually like that way of thinking about flows of money on the internet has been coming up a lot recently. And web monetization also, which is just like a protocol that I've played with quite a bit recently, is also stream based. And the way that works is like if you have a web page open, the amount of time that you spend on the web page creates a stream of transactions back to the web page publisher. And so you have like a series of transactions through the stream of essentially money or something that represents money. Instead of making money through transactions or through advertising, you're making money through these web monetized streams, which is like being offered as a kind of like replacement to the current business models that exist on the internet. That's web monetization in particular, but Superfluid is different. It's like a composable way of like managing these streams.
All right, and so is that stream is payment from the user? Is that the idea on the website?
Yeah, you can think of it as a payment. It's not directly a payment because it's something that represents a payment, and it depends on like how it connects to a different financial system. That makes sense.
What you're saying is learn to speed read now.
Yeah, like again, why would a user want to engage with a website like that?
Why would a user want to engage with a website like that?
Yeah, like Rob said, like learn to speed read. Like why would I could just screenshot the website, close the website, read. You know what I mean? Like if it costs me to engage, and like I know like with
like well right now like the cost when you are on a website, the way that they make money is through advertising. So the cost to you is not as explicit. The cost to you is they're harvesting your data, right? Why do you pay for paywall data? Because you want like a high quality content. And then in certain cases, you might want to be paying on demand as opposed to be paying a lump sum bundle cost to get access to content behind a paywall. In that case, you would want to pay for the amount of time you spend on the website as opposed to paying a lump sum. Like if you read like a few seconds of the New York Times or whatever, for some reason, you might want to choose this mechanism to pay over another mechanism. The idea for a lot of these is that they are composable in the sense that you can connect them up in different ways to create the type of like business models that work for that particular type of content that's being published. Money Legos.
There's like a piece from Ben Rao like years ago around like metaphors of money, and he talked about like how people think about it. Is it a stock or a flow? Is it like a clock, like a thing that incessantly ticks forward? And there was like 10 or something metaphors, and so this stream-based thing is interesting because I'm curious like who has like related to money that in that way in the past, because to me like when I heard about the guy being paid, I was like, oh my god, like that's so unintuitive to like from a behavioral psychology perspective of like what it means to deal with money and the kinds of like ways that people might be able to like toy with it or at least like turn it into like terrain of like struggle, because it's like kind of complex and confusing, and small changes in certain variables can probably have very large impacts, without like you realizing, in the way that like when you get paid like some lump sum in the thousands of dollars, you can like it's so much more concrete than being paid like 15 cents a second or whatever it might be. And I think that relates sort of to Tamara's point of like people like gaming the system and being like, okay, well, I'm just going to screenshot like a site instead of staying on it. Like when you up the complexity, you up the vulnerability.
So web monetization is different from this. Like your stream can be bursty too, right? The revenue source doesn't necessarily have to be something that is generating like an even stream necessarily per second. It's just a way of like automating like the distribution of money from like a revenue source to payroll. There is a time component in the sense that like we live in a world which has time, but that doesn't mean that this like money that's coming in is like even or anything. It could be bursty based on a contract also. Does that make sense?
What did you mean by even?
What I'm hearing from Paul, the way he's like talking about it, is that there's this even stream of money coming in. Instead of like a contract being paid out, in a lump sum, it's being paid out per second, which doesn't have to be the case to use Superfluid. You could still have a contract that's paid out in a single moment, but as soon as it's paid out, it's executed and split and shared out to the different people who are sitting on the other side of like where the payroll is being paid out. There's nothing about this which makes a case that you have to have like a continuous stream of money coming in, although it does also support that, if that makes sense.
It does. My mind went to where Valdis's mind went to, like the behavioral implications on both work and spending. And it would be interesting to see like however it was programmed, whether it was in a continuous stream, whether it was in bursts, even if it like automatically changed per week. And then if you could, you know, also then track to credit card spending habits and to see like the implications on that. And then if people could choose later on based on those findings, like how I want my money to be distributed to me in a workday, it could, in a sense, give people more control over their finances in a different way than it did before.
Yeah.
Yeah, the value proposition is no, like they say on the website, no capital lockups, right? It's like, it's not sitting in a holding period anywhere. It's just distributed out to wherever it needs to go at the end.
It will have a negative effect on bottle service purchase on Friday night, things like that.
I also wanted to say the metaphor piece. I was thinking of that with Udit's signal as well, like what new metaphors would come for money or the financial system when we tie it to music. And I don't know enough about like the mechanics of music to say something really ingenious about that, but I think it has the potential again to transform the way we conceptualize of money.
Yeah, I think that's interesting though, because of like you're thinking of because streams, right? Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people thinking about this right now too.
Rob, you're a fan of plumbing. This is another fan of modern plumbing. These are just tubes that you can like architect and like compose in different ways to like shape the flow of money.
I feel like this would be one of so many aspects of like the emerging economy, like the behavior piece here. It's like it just seems like if things are going the way they seem to in the sort of world of cryptocurrency, just the way people interface with money is going to be totally different. Like, or is it going to be situations where the currency that I'm paying, looking at this website, for example, I don't even think of it as currency, for example. And we have versions of that, like point systems and different things like that in the world where it's like there's no actual value, or there's value to one party more so than there is the other, and you know. But in terms of how people conceive of it, I feel like there's a lot of that happening right now, even in the like crypto grants and things that are happening. There's just like a lot of instances where it's not always clear whether both parties see the value of this the same way, or like it's kind of play money, it's kind of real money. And I wonder if that will be something that persists or whether that will settle in a way.
If you actually need it to survive, then it'll stop being play money. You know, I keep bringing up the potato farmers example. Once like the potato farmers are bought into one of these things and you can actually buy your like potatoes, like whatever in some fashion through these things, then it'll become like real. Or when that's like the only way to do it.
But if there's enough a diverse array of different currencies, like will there'll be some that are more valuable, or will it not work like that? I don't know. But I'm also just thinking of it where it's like these website reading tokens or whatever. It's something that I just have because they came with my browser or something, you know. But actually accumulating a lot of them for a publisher or something is worth something. They have a big enough readership. I don't know.
Explain the last part again.
The idea that as an individual, it's like I've got enough, you know, tokens for reading websites that I don't think about it or worry about it, and I've got no other use for them really. And then it's a negligible amount for me to just like exchange them or something. But for a publisher or whatever that's getting paid as I read their website, accumulating enough of those from many readers is actually worth something to them.
Right.
And whether they'll be like
that's how it works.
Regular money.
Yeah, that's how it works with regular money too, right? Like where like if you have like a few, like you have like
I think it's different
like change. Yeah, because the way you think about like the way you think about Canadian Tire money is different from the way Canadian Tire thinks about Canadian Tire money.
Yeah, and that's what I mean.
I am still fascinated by the idea of streaming my paycheck into me as opposed to the lump sum and the implications of that. I don't know what the implications would be on work if it was tied to productivity or commission. Because like even when you're making commission on something, you know in your head what it looks like. But if it was being streamed into you as you made that sale on the phone or whatever, so as opposed to like maybe salaried jobs or whatever, like would that lead to like this incessant burnout or something, like where we were working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and like what that would mean? And then again, like I can't help but think like how someone would exploit that.
I don't think you can purely tokenize work like that also, where like you can say one moment of my time is worth this much money, and so the time I put in, I can be paid, I should be paid. Like every moment of my time is like worth the equal amounts of money and can be perfectly tokenized, and it should be paid out in certain ways. Like I think the amount of productivity changes over time. There's like a little bit of flexibility that you need, your mood, I don't know, like how you add the energy that you have. And like, I think the way you get paid out should have that kind of give so that you can, and that's built into like your paycheck, right? So as much as I think it's like, it should be built into your paycheck, right? There is some value in bundling together time into like a lump sum as opposed to like tokenizing every second, which I agree. I think it could lead to like burnout and people trying to like maximize the amount of tokens they're getting per second or whatever, something like that.
Well, and if like, let's say your money wasn't like, let's say it was this stream and you were doing it by time, like I think another unintended consequence was actually that you would have lower quality work, like as an employer, if people were working not necessarily based on like level, we move away from quality, I imagine, unless it was, if it was entirely time-based.
Why do you think so?
Well, like you were saying, like if you're tired or something, so let's let's not use sales, but let's use, I don't know, coding or whatever. I imagine, the quality would go down if you are someone that is driven or out of necessity needs to make a ton of money.
Also, I think it's going to change the way people think about roles and jobs too, right? Like I think it's going to lead to more like people designing roles and structuring work, so more kinds of roles are like fungible essentially, where you can like replace one person with another person because you need a way to like tokenize these roles and tokenize like the time they're spending on these roles. And I don't think that's the way we should think about people, period. Like I think this is just like another way of like tokenizing and assembly lining production, which I think leads to burnout, alienation, people feeling atomized.
Don't you think that's exactly the reason that someone's going to pick it up? Because we shouldn't do it. Like I'm thinking of the people that are going to space again. Like, of course, I 100% agree with you, but like its existence means someone's going to exploit it.
Yeah, of course, I agree. The other side to this, though, is that this is just like the plumbing layer, and like new systems can be built on top of it. You have to tokenize something at some point, right? Like you have to quantify something at some point, which is like, and the current economy is also that, right? Like pennies are tokens, $2 are tokens, right? And we have tokenized things. So this is just another instantiation of tokenization that's happening.
But do you think this is signal or noise?
I think it's a signal of something different, actually, which is like what I would call like services-based architecture, which is like having essentially like all these like services that are kind of like operating, and then like the way they interact is through like streams of information. And it was happening on the internet before with information, and now it's happening with money too. And I think like the convergence of like the Web 2 stuff, where we had like streams of information, APIs, so on, kind of like working together with Web 3, which is like streams of money. I don't know. Like I think that's like a new space that's emerging for the web.
I wonder too if like we keep thinking about it in terms of like our individual experience with this, but like will it be more just like, you know, internet advertising company receiving like stream of money from their clients or whatever, like not so different than the way they might be billing now based on views and clicks and things like that as well, and just like automating certain things like that.
Like the way you can think about like the whole like chain of like value and like how money flows through it, right? Like, and that's what this is trying to do, which is like program the entire stream from like creation to execution. So like imagine you as a digital artist creating a little picture of a cat. A company buys it and puts it into like an ad.
Yeah.
A viewer watches a piece of content and like there's some money that's streamed into like the publisher's account, that's streamed to the ad person, and like a micro fraction of that goes to like the content creator who made the cat, right? And like you can like plumb, like you can create the plumbing for the entire flow of money, and there's no intermediary. It's all just like happening automatically, and you as like the cat meme maker is living off these like millions of tiny streams of money coming into your bank account.
And the services-based architecture for finance, I guess, or however you want to frame this, like, is that?
Yeah, I don't know if like other people are using this term. This is a term I'm using
okay.
Right now.
Is it different from the way like the economy works already? Do you think, or?
Yeah, in the sense that it's permissionless, right? Like it's just like all executing without intervention. Like somebody sets up the architecture and then it just goes.
Like
I want to ask Valis like what about this you were interested in also, like what aspect of this do you think is a signal?
I mean, it's like, yeah, there's two kind of layers. There's like this specific use case, which was just like, what would it mean for incomes to be streamed? Like, why would anyone want that? What would that look like? And then, yes, the broader kind of Web3 plumbing architecture and whatnot. Like you're calling this like a neutral layer, like a plumbing infrastructure layer, maybe, but it's also like a space where, I don't know, like financial systems are reflections of a particular
ideology and way of thinking.
They're more flexible actually. I think they are more flexible, but they're reflections of a particular like arrangement of social power at a moment. And so like it's not going to just embody one thing or another. It's like whoever seizes it is going to put it to those uses. And so, I mean, the idea in the thread was that this could help like alleviate some payday loan stuff, which again is just like offhand random comment, but my thought was like the opposite. I was like, oh my god, as soon as this happens, every loan is going to have a stream clause attached to it so that your future earnings don't even come to you, they just bypass you entirely, right? So they're just like streamed like fully into the debt that you owe, right? Somebody else, and then they'll never even touch you. So whatever control you might have had to not pay your creditors back is going to disappear, right? Based on today's power that creditors do have today. And so that was what I was thinking. I was just like,
that's
a lot of ways.
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Like imagine like another reality where your bank account was set up like this like programmable cash flow system where like money comes in and automatically it gets like paid out into like your Netflix account is like a constantly streaming money from you. Like
it's funny because it's kind of like that already.
It's
kind
of
like
that.
Per month, right? It's per month, though, but like imagine it happening like instantaneously, where you're like, but the way it would be though is that when you like open up your like bank account, it's going to be like a fluctuating graph where every moment is like
a whole bunch of different services going.
Yeah.
And any individual thing is just like, oh yeah, like whatever, I paid a penny to Netflix second.
I think that would disrupt people's ability to save. I think that like would have really big
have like these kinds of issues.
I think you're right, Tamara. I think it will.
The example of like your money being reflected as a waveform or something, like with the amplitude, I think is actually very cool because it's like we reify money so much. Like we think like money is some kind of external entity when really it's a representation of social relations of power. Like how much power do I have in the world to command other people to do certain things for me, right? It's a relationship between people. Like it's not its own thing, right? It's just, it's a relation that mediates us. And so seeing it as a waveform makes that kind of more apparent in some weird way. Like, I know it's entirely speculative, but to see your so-called like social relation index power score or something instead of like a bank
live
number
power
that you can,
score.
yeah, that you can just say is like, oh, that's me, I've saved $200,000, as opposed to saying I've accumulated X amount of power over others, like, which is really what that 200,000 means.
It would make markets really unpredictable. I think it would make it really difficult because I think it would impact how people would save and how people spend. I think like the timing of like the release of things, like businesses are pretty calculated with when and how they release things. I think that would make it more unpredictable for them about like when they can guarantee people will be willing to purchase.
Mm-hmm.
You could have good effects on how people are responsible for their transactions, to be thinking about it as flows in that way, like it's coming and going, where is it going in each case, rather than like, let me like accumulate this much and reward myself by doing this or whatever. It's like it is a different mindset. I mean, I'm sure there are people who think about this stuff this way already way more than I do. It definitely is a shift for, I think, for myself and for a lot of people.
I just think of like the UX implications for like your bank also, which is like, well, you have like knobs that you can like tune for like different payment channels. And you're like, oh yeah, this month I want to like pay like this percentage, and you can turn the knob and increase it, which is kind of cool. And maybe this goes like right back to like that original,
the Netflix knob, the RSP knob, like
yeah, all these knobs, right?
Adjusting these things.
Yeah. Which goes right back to the signal that I brought, which is like this guy is like way ahead of the curve. He's already thinking about it in terms of knobs and flows. He's already got the UX down.
Way that I could imagine people already thinking money as streams is like people who have wealth, who have like passive streams of income. It's like what you do, because most people don't have any salaries. Like, or many people think that like what they're doing is like plugging in as many salaries, input streams as possible into their actually, people who are well off.
Bathtub knob. Conversation.
A whole lot of pipes.
The hot water, the cold water.
I mean, I think that's a signal too. I think like everybody's trying to think about like replumbing all our systems right now. We're in the moment where systems need to be replumbed. They're all leaky.
I agree. I think it's a signal, and I think like with regards to payment, with regards to like paying for a service, all of it, I think it's very interesting, and the potential like services that will come to support people with the chaos. I think for some people, I think it'll feel rather chaotic.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of felt like the example was noise, just because of the point we're kind of just making of like, already we talk about revenue streams. There's already lots of ways that sort of versions of this happening in terms of even, the sort of dashboard, I guess, or whatever experience of looking at the numbers go up and down or whatever. But yeah, and in this, there's definitely a lot of signals. And I wonder too if there's like in all of what we've been talking about, any kind of signal of like systems literacy or some other like ways of representing systems as in different ways, and whether that's like a change and something we'll see more of. So I don't imagine a lot of these conversations are sort of ones that would have been had like 70 years ago or whatever in the same way.
70 years ago? 7 years ago.
I said 70. I'm thinking longer. Well, I'm sort of talking about like systems literacy in like a mainstream way, right? Systems thinking literacy, I guess.
I think like I think systems literacy is increasing, and I think we are realizing we're inextricable from systems now. And so I think people have like a felt sense of it. I don't think they have the technical sense of it. And these little things, all of these signals, noise, all the things that have been brought to the table today, I think are different ways to bring those to light, I guess. And I think people are demanding it more, actually. People are saying, I don't know if they're demanding it of themselves or they're demanding them of the people who create the systems and participate in the systems, but people are asking for transparency in our systems in a different way. And I think some of these are like, if there was a choice with like the example that Valdis gave, I think that's one like way that maybe people would feel empowered to understand the system in a different way if they had a choice.
All right, podcast from later.